So apparently live, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe we will see if anybody comes into the chat. See if I can get any feedback. Let's see. So, how y'all doing out there today? Gonna see. We're gonna do a mic check in a second, and we're gonna try to handle some business before we hear anything. Okay. We hear anything. Okay. We hear anything. So I do believe we are live and direct. I may not necessarily be able to get the show's intro played today, but that's okay. How y'all doing out there today? We are gonna work on that for another episode, and we're gonna try to get it started. I will wait a couple of minutes to see if anybody's coming through, but if you're just tuning in, please feel free to say something in the chat. Please feel free to hit that like button, just to subscribe to the channel. And at least by the time this session is over tonight, you will see a comment that is posted. Feel free to leave comments in response to the topic. What are we talking about tonight? We're talking about FBA. We're talking about ADOS. And we're talking about reparations. So I'm not necessarily a person that is in favor of this label of FBA, although I do understand its purpose. I do understand, at least, okay, not its purpose. I understand what they say is the purpose. They say the purpose is to be positive about promoting Black American culture. As in theory, that makes sense, and I wouldn't be against that. They say that the idea behind it is, you know, when you use the label Black, you include all Black groups in the diaspora, and they say that's a bad thing. I think that's part of my issue with them. They say that's a bad thing. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. But again, I can understand a little bit of why they think it's a bad thing. Only in the sense of whether you like it or not, whether we like it or not, there's always delineation, there's always breakdown, there's always division, there's always ways to separate groups. You know, you can say, well, all those people are white. And that may be true, but within that white group, they themselves will separate and differentiate themselves between the Italians, the Anglo-Saxons, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the English, the Germans, and so on and so forth. That's not a problem because they always see and they always operate under the notion that they bind together as white people despite their differences in nationalities and religions and cultures. They still bind together as one racial group. I don't care how you feel about the term race. You know, the social scientists take one approach to discussing race. The archaeologists take another approach to discussing race. I'm not getting into all of that. As far as I'm concerned, race is real. I don't care that you may consider it a social construct. Money is a social construct, and you ain't getting rid of that. So I'm not getting rid of race. But like I said, in the white world, they recognize race. They recognize that they all belong to a white race, and they find ways to work together in spite of the differences in their nationalities, their cultures, their religions. In the so-called Asian race, they recognize that they are all within a certain racial group, but they find ways to work together in spite of their differences. So if the so-called white people can find a way to band together, the so-called yellow people can find a way to band together. Yes, they have their differences. There are some things that the Chinese might be willing to go to war with the Japanese. There are some things that the Japanese may not necessarily like about the Chinese or the Malaysians. But then there will be things that they work together on. Even in the subcontinent of Asia, you have the Indians and the Pakistanis and the Afghanistan, where the race may be the same or looked at as the same in spite of the differences in nationality, the differences in culture, the differences in religion. And on some things they may not necessarily get along, but on other things they will get along. So they find their ways to work together. And lo and behold, when they all get over to this country, it's going to be even easier for them to put their differences aside, because when they're up against the predominant culture of white America, because white America is not going to care and not going to listen to, not even going to try and pay attention to the difference between a Chinese and a Japanese, or a Pakistani and an Indian. They say, you're all brown people, you're all yellow people, and we don't like you. But they will create a hierarchy, and they'll say, if we got to deal with anybody, here's the hierarchy. There's a pecking order, and they're going to put themselves at the top. They're going to put black people at the very bottom. And then all the other variations and shades of brown, red, and yellow, they're going to intersperse in the middle. And they'll just walk down that line. Now, everybody else seems to know this. The Asians know that they got to stick together. The Indians know that they got to stick together. Or the brown folk know that they got to stick together. The Latinx community know that they got to stick together. They share a common language, but they tend to stick together, whether it's Cuban and Puerto Rican or so on and so forth. They approach the dominant society, they approach the predominant society like, we stick together. So in spite of their differences within their own racial group, they may be different as the fingers on the hand, but when they are up against a common enemy, they bind together like a fist. And then you get to our group, the black people. FBA, ADOS, And all they want to do is take that fist and keep it separate. They want to put the blacks born in America over here, the blacks born in Jamaica over here, the blacks born in Ghana over here, the blacks born in Nigeria over here, the blacks born in South Africa over here. Anytime we try to come together as one, no, we're different. We're different. And the saddest thing about it is, it's sad. It's bad enough that you have these quote unquote leaders, these quote unquote influencers who are spearheading this campaign of division. That in and of itself is bad. But what's worse is that people flock to it. I tell you, and it's one thing that has always troubled me. When you look at the history of our struggle, they say hindsight is 2020. So I get it. Hindsight is 2020. So anytime you get a chance to look back, it's very easy to look back and say, see, that's where you went wrong. That's where you messed up. Here's where you should have went left instead of right. So I get it that sometimes, but that's the point. Sometimes you have to look at your history and reflect. And you have to be able to say, there are some things that we did wrong, or there are some things that we could have did. There's some things that we should have did differently. There's nothing wrong with reflection. But what strikes me is when you look through the lens of hindsight and you see where you stepped incorrectly or inappropriately or wrong, you should be able to say, let us not go back down that path again. Let us not make another wrong turn. What these people are doing is they're seeing a wrong turn and they're leaning into it. They're like, yeah, let's keep doing it. Now, so what do I mean by that? There's nothing wrong with Black Americans who are FBA saying, hey, we have a certain culture that is ours, and either we want to protect it or we want to promote it, but we want to preserve the idea and the notion that it is ours. There isn't anything necessarily wrong with that. And when you start off from that position, I really don't think too many people, too many other ethnicities will have a problem with you, because Jamaicans are not trying to hustle in on Trinidadian culture. Ghanaians are not trying to hustle in on Ethiopian culture. Everybody recognizes that each group of Black people have their own specific culture. They also recognize that as Black people, we all share common enemies. And this whole thing, you people say, are you down for the cause? Are you down for the struggle? Well, that came from recognizing who the enemy was. We all share the same common enemy. And so you have these people talking all this mess about Pan-Africanism is dead. If Pan-Africanism is dead, then Black power is dead. If Black power is dead, then the Black struggle is dead. Because it's all the same. And if that's the case, well, then stop talking about reparations. If Pan-Africanism is dead, reparations is dead. Because it's all stemming from the same struggle, the same cause, the same common goals. It's all the same campaign. So when you say, okay, well, you want to preserve your Black American culture, Who's trying to take it from you? Now, if you get off into this whole heated debate about hip hop, well, yeah, you might be able to identify some folks that's trying to take it from you. But on the whole, other than hip hop, if you really want to look at, like, when you deal with the hip hop topic, yeah, it does seem as if there are some Latinx people trying to hustle in on part of the hip hop legacy, but I would still say it depends on what part you're talking about. Like, it should be clear that, especially when if you consider hip hop to be the music, it's clear that that is pointing definitively towards the descendants of the African slave trade, the descendants of the Maafa. Now, if you start to say, like KRS was teaching, that hip hop has 5 different elements, and then it grew to 7, and it grew to 9, and I don't even know what the number is now, because I think I've heard 11 and 13. But either way, when you start to look at all the other elements outside of the music, well, then there's some shared contribution, which again is fine, but there's some shared contribution. But if you're talking about just literally the creation, there's not a lot of sharing on the creation aspect of it. But again, that's a hip hop thing. Hip hop is one element of Black culture. Whether you're looking at the music or the whole lifestyle of hip hop, it's still not the end all to Black culture. Black culture is bigger than hip hop. So other than now, when you look at that, historically speaking, the people who have done more to try and take Black culture away from Black people, or take the authorship of Black culture away from Black people, were white people. Black culture included, here we go again. When you look at the music of Black culture, the music of Black culture included rock and roll. We started that, and that was taken. But again, that's just looking at the music. That's not looking at all the other elements of culture. And so sometimes I'm like, do people even know what culture is? Because you get into this whole thing about protecting your culture. So separating yourself from the rest of the Black folk so that you can protect your culture. The only people that have ever tried to take your culture from you were white people. If you look at food, most of Southern cuisine came from Black culture, but they don't call it. When white people in the South cook, they're cooking Black food. They're cooking Black cultural products and meals, and they just call it Southern. It's not Southern, it's Black. They're the ones taking your culture. Jamaicans aren't running around saying fried chicken is ours. White people are running around saying fried chicken is Southern, when fried chicken is Black people on slave plantations. So again, this whole thing about the idea of protecting your culture is fine. But then the way that the conversation manifests online, it's like, oh, this has just gotten, if the train is off the tracks, now you're off the rails. And I say all of that to say, again, this idea about FBA trying to protect its culture, it's off the train tracks, because you're not protecting your culture. What you're doing is just throwing darts at other people for no reason. And I say that again. So let's step aside from protecting culture, step away from that, and look at the reparations argument. You know, people are spending more time online talking about who deserves a check than actually putting boots on the ground and working with the organizations to get the check. It's like, what you think if you talk enough on Twitter, you're gonna get reparations just because you talked about it? So I'm like, this whole FBA ADOS movement, it's like, again, it's like, you think tweeting about reparations, you think playing the gatekeeper on the conversation, especially between Black Americans and other Black folk, you think that's going to get you the reparations check? Bless your hearts. It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet by arguing over who owns the wrench. Naive doesn't even begin to describe this kind of activity. I mean, this strategy is as useful as putting a screen door on a submarine. I really do wish the hate that's coming up out of these online conversations. I don't care if it's on YouTube, Twitter, X, Facebook, Clubhouse, wherever it is, everywhere I go and I encounter these conversations. It's like, if you want reparations, why are you arguing with a Jamaican about whether or not they deserve a check? If you want reparations, shouldn't you be arguing with your state elected officials? Now, if you show me that you're arguing with the state elected official who happens to be Jamaican, okay, then maybe I need to reflect more. Maybe I need to do some more digging. But from what I've seen, I haven't seen any of these social media platform influencer giants inviting the governor of their state, the senator of their state, the congressman or congresswoman of their state to their platform to have a conversation. So it's like, so what is all of this yik yak about? What is it for? If you're not going to talk to the mayor in your city about setting up a local reparations program, why are you arguing with someone halfway across the planet about who deserves a check? How is it positive? How is there positivity in that? How is it constructive? What are you building, or are you just destroying? And I don't mean destroying in the positive sense. Like, you can destroy when you take away negativity, but that's not taking away negativity. That's adding on to it. So again, my question to you is, what are you building? How are you securing the reparations check? By arguing that quote unquote immigrants who just got off the boat yesterday shouldn't be in the line. There is no line. You have not convinced half of Congress to even study reparations. You have not convinced half of the Senate to even study reparations. And you're arguing with Black people in the diaspora who just so happen not to have been descended from the plantations in the South, as to whether or not they should get in the line. So people doing all this talk, and the talk is so far over your head Like, do you know that there are lawyers who have been hired to do this work? Do you know that there are organizations set up that are doing this work? Do you know that they are lobbying Congress, but they're not being successful because they need all that extra energy that's on social media about whether or not we should get it should be directed into the organizations. They need people in the organizations to help knock on doors, call senators. It's like you have no idea. If the reparations check was to come, and let's say the way in which they figured out how to distribute the money, the people did the most work for it, get checks first. The Instagram and Twitter and Facebook influencer who convinced 1 million people to yell bloody murder at a Jamaican ain't gonna be in the line. Ain't gonna be first in the line. Ain't gonna be up in the front of the line. Because the people that would be signing off on the checks, the people in DC and the people in your state capital offices, they ain't heard of you. They're not talking to you. They're talking to a grassroots activist who shows up at the city board meeting, the school board meeting, the mayor's open house, the governor's town hall. That's where you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be on social media yelling and screaming about, let's get this black guy out of the line. Let's get this black woman out the line. Show me your ancestry. First and foremost, all of that's been taken care of in the legislation, which you would know if you read about the legislation. It shouldn't even be an argument. Why would you be arguing with people about whether or not they should be in the line when you can just be promoting the legislation that needs to be voted on? Because in that legislation, they already delineate who gets it. So in that regard, you don't need another label. That's my other problem with this. You don't need a label to separate yourself, because the legislation that's already been written, or the bill that has already been written, they already designate who gets it. So for instance, a lot of people like to bring this up. A lot of people like to bring up the idea that, when the Asians got their reparations bill, well, here's the thing. Not every Asian got it. Not every Asian American got it. If you were Chinese, you didn't get it because they didn't put the Chinese in jail. The Japanese got it. But the Japanese and the Chinese didn't have to jump up and down and yell and scream and call each other names and say, get out the line and you don't deserve it. The Chinese went about their business. They knew who it was for. They're both Asian, but they didn't even have to have that argument. We don't have to have this argument. So if we are participating in this argument, it's an exercise in futility, for one. But other than futility, it's an exercise in divisionary tactics. It's an exercise in divide and conquer, which is the one trick, which is the one strategy that we have fell for since the enemy first found out we were here. We were on the planet. There was a time when Europeans didn't know anything other than their small local area. They didn't know that Africa was there. All they knew was England. All they knew was Italy. When they first got onto boats and started roaming the seas, they thought they were the only ones on the whole planet. And when they first started discovering that there were other people, yes, every time they found another group of people, they found melanated people. And every time they found a group of melanated people, they said, we must divide them in order to conquer them. They've been using the divide and conquer tactic on us for over 400 years. And we keep falling for it. That's what I meant when I said, when hindsight is 2020, you look back and you see, even if you just go back to the 60s, the black struggle was in full swing. We were in, that was like the closest we've been to actually securing all our rights. And even during that time period in the 60s and the 70s, we were falling for the okie doke. We were falling for being divided and conquered. So I'm like, okay, hindsight is 2020. You take a look back and you see, as powerful as MLK was, as powerful as Malcolm X was, even they fell victim to divide and conquer. They tried to get over it. They realized they were being divided, but it came a little too late. But even they realized that they had been falling for the divide and conquer tactic, and they couldn't get out from under it before it was too late, because the enemy already had their assassinations set. But we fall for that all the time. Here's the thing. If you say that you're in favor of reparations, okay, and you say reparations is a justice cause, it is a morality cause, it is something that is owed. All of this means it's a legal battle. If it's a legal battle, it has to be waged in the courts. If it's waged in the courts, eventually it has to go to a vote. It has to go to Congress. When it goes to Congress, it has to be voted like anything else in this democracy of America. What am I getting at? Well, at the end of the day, when it goes to a vote, you need every vote possible in order to get it over the hump of no. You need over half of the senators to vote yes. You need over half of the congressmen to vote yes. Congressmen, congresswomen to vote yes. So the only way you're going to get that is to have everybody who could and would be on your side applying pressure from all angles on those congressmen and senators. So if black people are only 13% of the population, and I don't care if you in the group, oh, we don't trust those numbers. Those are the numbers that everybody's going to go by. You can not trust them all you want to, but you can't prove otherwise. You can say we're really more than that. You can't prove it in the court of law. You can't prove it in Congress. You can't prove it in the Senate. The senators and the Congress people are going to go by what's on paper. So as far as they're concerned, we are 13% of the population. So the last thing we can afford to do is to be yelling and screaming amongst the 13%, trying to get rid of votes, get rid of people. You don't deserve it. You don't belong in the line. You need to figure out how to work in conjunction, in solidarity, in unity, in Pan-African spirit with every Black person over here. They may not deserve a reparations check, but they may have the right to vote. So what would they vote if you're going to alienate them and shit on them all the time? They'll happily vote no. So why alienate your own kind, your own people? What you need is to figure out, okay, what do I need? What do you need? That's what they do in Congress, pork barrel legislation. If they're going to vote for this bill, I'll vote for your bill if you add something into it for me. Now, if you think that's going to take place, if you think legislation specifically for Black Americans, specifically for ADOS, specifically for FBA is going to get passed without everybody agreeing, without half of those senators voting yes, you're delusional. But that's the whole point. That's why you would rather just argue amongst yourselves and scream bloody murder against another melanated brother. Because the work that's required to get reparations passed is hard. It's too hard. It's way too difficult. It's a lot easier just to yell and scream and say, you don't deserve it. We gonna separate ourselves. I know my ancestry. If you know your ancestry and you know your lineage, you know you don't even fully rack up to the 13%, because within that 13% of the population that we constitute, 1 or 2 of those percentage points are immigrants not from here. So you want to go from 13 to 11% when it comes to the vote. And you can't even get all Black Americans to vote on any one particular subject anyhow. So again, what is the point? I'll tell you what the point is. The point is divide and conquer. The point is division. The point is to keep, Ralph Ellison, what did he write in Invisible Man? When the main character, when the protagonist got his letter from, got his reference letter from the president of the university. And he told him, don't open this. If you open the letter, then it's not going to be used. They're not going to accept your reference letter if it's open. So he didn't open it. So the point of that letter in the story is the point of the fight between FBA and other Black people. Later on in the story, he realized it way too late. It was too late to do anything else about it. Hindsight is 2020. But what he realized was the letter was written with the intent of screwing him over, of keeping him away from his goal. Way too late, he found out the letter was written to say, keep this nigga boy running. And that's what the point of all this FBA, ADOS versus Black immigrant groups is based on. It is based on the COINTELPRO spirit. I don't want to hear nothing about you old school. You know, COINTELPRO was shut down. You a fool. If you think the government stops programs that work in its favor just because people found out about them, That's the whole point of having black ops. The whole point of COINTELPRO, whether official or unofficial, direct or indirect, was to keep black people in a state of argument so that there cannot be a state of unity. So it kills me when I hear black people saying Pan-Africanism is dead. Black unity is dead. They're one and the same. If Pan-Africanism is dead, so too lies the carcass of Black American freedom, of Black American liberation. You can't have one without the other. Now you show me a congressman that's willing to vote along the ideology of FBA. Where? Because again, you're not going to secure reparations by talking about it online. Do you know who Cobra is? Do you know who Dr. Darity is? Have you read his work? Have you read the proposals? Do you know what HR 40 is? Or do you just know that you told off somebody from Nigeria in Clubhouse? So, like I said, I'm gonna close this session out. I hope I pissed somebody off. I hope I gave you a few ideas to think about. You can hit me up in the chat. You can leave a comment. You can tell me I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, if you can tell me, if you can show me, explain to me how I'm wrong, I'll do another live, and I'll say I was wrong, and here's why I was wrong. But because I really would like to know, how is it that arguing online gets you any closer to it's 100 senators. So how does arguing online with other citizens and non-citizens get you closer to getting 51 or 60 senators to vote yes on Black America, on FBA reparations? How is it that arguing on Twitter and Facebook gets you whatever the number is, 265 congressmen voting yes on reparations for FBA? So tell me that. Explain to me that. And once you've done that, I'll do another live and say, y'all, I was wrong. I was dead wrong. And let me tell you why. But that's my proper perspective. I don't have the music to play for you this time. I got to get some more stuff set up. But I do appreciate you for listening. Leave a comment. Like I said, hit the like button, subscribe, share this podcast, share this video with somebody, anybody, 2 bodies, 3 bodies. And I will check you out later. This is Shabazz with the proper perspective. Peace.